There is always going to be a certain element of risk when using an AI tool because you are putting your invention description out there into a software platform. Even if the company has a good policy, it's still taking a risk. So one thing that I always discuss with my clients is what kind of risks are you willing to take?
Hello and welcome to the Research Valorization podcast series. My name is Balzhano Razbaeva, Manager Strategic Initiatives at UN, and I'm your host for today. In this episode, we explore the world of tech transfer and innovation with Dvorah Graeser, founder and CEO of RocketSmart. We discuss the commercialization challenges universities face, explore the potential of AI in supporting technology transfer, and highlight the legal and ethical concerns around using such tools in commercialization more generally. It is my greatest pleasure to welcome Dvorah Graeser, founder and CEO of RocketSmart. We will learn more about the company, but Dvorah will be sharing with us her extensive knowledge on AI and how it all relates to the higher education ecosystems, including intellectual property, innovation, and all of the nitty-gritty behind it. I just would like to remind everyone that this event is part of our free fireside chat series, and for other events, including workshops, how-to sessions, head to un.org events to see what's on. And Dvorah, thank you so much for joining me. Perhaps it would be good if you could just tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then we can delve right into it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for inviting me. I always love talking about AI and tech transfer, two of my favorite subjects. So I'm Dvorah Graeser, founder and CEO of RocketSmart, rocketing your IP out of the university into a great licensing deal. I've been programming since I was 16, PhD in pharmacology, a program for the Human Genome Project. And then I became a US patent agent because I was passionate about helping innovators protect their innovations. From there, I learned that innovators also needed help with understanding the best business model. You need that for patents, but also, quite frankly, you need that for your ideas to make a difference in the world. For them to be commercialized, they have to fit into the marketplace. So I created our first AI models basically to replace me for helping folks understand what the best business models are. Now, AI is a hugely impactful tool. It can make us much more productive, but one of the things I have learned is AI makes everything go faster, the good and the bad. So in order for AI to impact us in a way that we want, we have to understand the problem that we're trying to solve and how we want to solve it, and then integrate AI into our work process.
Very curious to learn more about it. And I'm glad that we have this conversation ahead of us, because certainly there are many questions. And I would also encourage everyone to also share their thoughts in the chat, because we will have certainly a bit of time left in the end to take up those questions. But maybe just to start with and just to set the stage. So how do you generally see AI and other technological developments transforming the traditional model of tech transfer in universities? Do we see many universities already picking up that trend? Are they making use of it? And maybe how do you usually help them with that? And what is it that you are trying to achieve with this great initiative that you are leading?
So I have seen quite a few universities and other research institutions starting to do experiments with AI in particular generative AI. So when I talk about AI today, I'm mostly talking about generative AI. These could include general tools like ChatGPT or Claude, or the specialty tools for tech transfer like First Ignite or Scale IP. Generative AI in particular is a game changer because it is so very powerful. The experiments that folks are doing in universities and other tech transfer organizations is to, for example, find industries where their innovations could be useful, but also to find good contacts within particular companies. So many times an innovator will have this great idea. A university will have perhaps a great new drug or new medical device, a new idea for a car. Any of these ideas on its own is not really useful unless you can find the right company, in the right industry at the right time, and then not only that, find the right contact and give them the right information in the right way. So talk about trying to find a needle in a haystack. It is super hard for a human being to do. AI can be really helpful because AI can do a lot of the work and bring information to us. But because AI can bring us so much information, part of what I see universities and research organizations struggling with a bit is curation. They get so much output from AI. The question is then what to do with it. So there, having a really good process can be helpful. And that is one area that I do see tech transfer offices really working on right now.
I think is a very good point, because what, for example, we have seen is that often AI or generative AI as well can sometimes be seen like a black box itself. Being confronted by so many different outputs is one thing, but then also dealing with the tools such as AI can also be quite overwhelming, I can imagine, for some of the folks that worked at the universities, especially if they're not experts. So maybe the question is, how important is transparency in AI tools for tech transfer?
I believe transparency is really important for any technological tool that we're using. We should be able to understand how it works, what data it was trained on, how the data was collected, and then how it operates on information that we bring in order to create its outputs. Unfortunately, the majority of generative AI models are not really explainable. So explainability simply means, do we understand why the AI does what it does? And the short answer is no, we don't understand that. There have been many papers published on that, and I've yet to see a really good explanation. But transparency also relates to how the data is collected, how our data is collected. If we are putting an idea into an AI tool, we should know what happens to that data. That isn't always clear. The policies of these companies, in my opinion, could be much clearer in order to provide that kind of transparency. So yes, we need transparency. Unfortunately, no, we aren't always getting it. So then we need to ask ourselves, what are our policies? What is the policy of our organization? For example, can we put in confidential data into one of these tools? But then what is confidential data? You might say patient data is confidential. What about personal data? What about other information? What about an invention that we have filed a patent application on, or maybe one that we haven't and that hasn't been published yet? So all of these different gradations of confidentiality, of transparency are really important. I think that if we as a group demand such transparency and set guidelines for what we expect from our AI tools, we will get more answers. But sadly, at the moment, it's really hard to actually tell what's going on with the tools, and the transparency could be better. Now, I do guide my clients in looking at the tools. I'll contact the companies. I'll read through all of the very long, fine print to understand what's going on. And I'll also look at what others have said in the field, because there are other experts who have looked at these tools and how they're working to try to get information. But no one right now has a complete picture, unfortunately, on transparency with AI or even explainability.
What would be the process for you to work with the universities with all of this very complex picture? Again, I'm also not an expert on AI, but I'm very curious to hear maybe step by step how usually the work would look like for you when, say, you work with University A that has a particular objective B when it comes to commercialization. So what is it that exactly you will be doing with them?
So the first thing I do is ask them to describe their process to me and where the pain points are and the friction points. Where are there blocks in the process? Where do they feel they're spending a lot of time and, quite frankly, not getting a lot of return? Those are the areas that are particularly ripe for applying AI. Now, I would ask that of them even before we start talking about AI tools. And the reason why there are a ton of AI tools out there. But if I don't know the problem that they really need and want to solve, then I can't recommend any AI tool. It's not just our AI tools that I'll recommend. I'll also recommend general purpose tools or specialty tech transfer tools, or maybe specialty tools that aren't just for tech transfer, but that could help them overcome blocks in their flow to enable them to move more quickly through the process and also more efficiently. I also need to hear about their frustrations, because quite frankly, there are some things that not only take time, but drive everyone bonkers. Those, I think, are also the aspects that are really ripe for AI. Now, it is even possible to bring AI on premises, that is, within a private cloud controlled by the university or other organization, and to have the models operate in a particular way. I know it sounds far-fetched, but it is possible. All of this comes down to one single question. What is the problem that you, as the university, as the tech transfer organization, are trying to solve with AI?
Do you think that the universities versus, say, other research organizations or companies as well would have the same challenges when it comes to tech transfer? And how would you usually go about their issues?
Every organization is really different. You can't even say that all universities are the same, because it's not correct. First of all, different universities have different fields of technology where they're getting the innovations from their professors. They have different levels of staffing. So some universities have people who specialize in small molecule pharmaceuticals. Other universities may have one person who handles everything that's medical, and maybe also robotics and, I don't know, aquaculture. So depending on the staffing of the university and the variety of technologies that they're looking at, they're going to have different needs. Now, that, of course, is different from a hospital. Hospitals tend to have very medically focused innovations, obviously. So they're talking about a narrower range, but potentially more depth to each of the innovations, and also potentially a longer period for connecting them to a company, because these innovations can be riskier. A small molecule pharmaceutical is very risky. It can take longer in tech transfer to connect them to the right company who wants to take that risk on, and they may have to do more work first. Now, looking at companies, larger companies, smaller companies, they also have wildly different needs. It depends on the area they're in. It depends on, are they competing on innovation? Because if they're competing on innovation and not cost, then I would say, yes, you do need to come and talk to universities, hospitals, and research organizations through an organization like UIIN in order to be able to compete effectively. Because these days, competition is moving fast and it's global.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's especially for the smaller players or perhaps the hidden champions, it's always a tricky part to then be able to get to the forefront of that. With that, I guess I also wanted to ask, how would you go about, I guess, not only identifying maybe the IP, but also how would you go about protecting it? Because again, I think this is also one of the biggest challenges in tech transfer more generally. So is there any specific function or a specialization that you would provide when working with clients all across the globe?
Absolutely. So when it comes to AI, there's a few things we would look at. Sometimes AI is a good tool, but sometimes also AI can complicate the process of the invention itself. For example, let's suppose your researchers used AI to create their innovation. The US has a particular set of rules, and other countries or regions, such as the European Patent Office, are developing their rules for when is an invention not sufficiently inventive because there wasn't enough human conceptual work or enough human ingenuity that was being brought into it. So that's one place where AI can actually cause friction. Of course, protecting AI itself is quite difficult because defining an AI invention is also really hard. On the other hand, AI can also be really beneficial. For example, I would use AI tools to understand what is the patent landscape, who are the competitors, what kinds of industries could best benefit from this innovation, so we can tune and focus the patent towards those different areas. AI in that case then is really a big help for us. But we do need to be cognizant of all the ways that AI can influence an innovation, all the ways it can help, but also all the ways it can hinder, and make certain with our IP strategy that we take all these things into account in order to make the strongest patent portfolio for a university or other research institution.
I'm also very curious to hear, Dora, if you could maybe tell us a little bit more of the evolution of your previous organization. I believe it's called KISS Platform, right? So
Yes.
how did it evolve into what you're doing today, which is RocketSmart? And maybe just tell us a little bit more about the story of it.
So we actually started in January 2020. Guess what was just about to happen then? Yes, I was in Vietnam hearing about this virus that seemed to be spreading, and no one really knew anything about it. But we originally had started to help startups define their business model. Because again, I had learned that all kinds of innovators, from small startups to bigger universities to really huge corporations, innovators and all of these had a hard time defining their business model. So we started off with KISS Platform to try to help startups in particular define their business model so that they could create a product that would fit into a particular market. However, what we found through the pandemic and afterward is we were getting approached more by universities. Now, I had been working with universities on patent protection for many, many years. So I've been a US patent agent since 1996. It's been a long time. And I'd help them also understand a bit about the business aspects and the market aspects in order to make their patent stronger. But we were being approached by them more than the startups were to help them understand. And you can understand why. Universities have a wide variety of innovations. Unlike a startup that maybe they have one product, and they can do the research and understand how that fits into the market, or at least they better if they want to be successful. But universities every single day can get a new innovation that can fit a new industry and a new market with a new profile to create a new product. That is very difficult for their tech transfer offices to handle effectively. So that was why they started coming to us. And that is how we actually then became RocketSmart, rocketing our IP out of the university and into a great licensing deal. One of the aspects that we focus on right now is partnering. So we help universities particularly those with older patents, those patents that have been on the shelf for a while. They're maybe 7 years old in life science, and they're really great, and they're just sitting there, and nothing's happening with them. We help find an industry partner, a company who wants to take a license to these patents for a variety of reasons. Maybe they don't want their competitor to get a hold of it. Maybe they want it because, oh, wow, they just realized they've developed an innovation and your university patent covers it, and they want to be able to protect it. So that is what we have specialized in. But we do also work with university spun out startups to help them find another company to partner with for commercialization. We look at partnerships and relationships. This is not purely transactional. This is something which will help the university and the company together change the world. And so we want to help them develop a longer-term relationship.
I'm very glad to hear that you're also taking this sort of partnership, relationships building kind of approach, because I think one thing that is often being said, or one of the ways to criticize commercialization, is it's very one directional, it's very transactional. So it's good to hear that you're also looking into how data-driven approaches can help in finding the right partner. What are the challenges around it? Do you find any challenges in this partnering bit in particular? How easy it is usually using smart approaches to identify partners?
That depends, is of course the answer.
Yeah.
But what it really depends on is, are others in the industry commercializing technology as is described in the patent or a similar technology? So what can happen with patents is they can, let's say, get old. Let's say they become more than 10 years old. So at this point, if no one is commercializing the technology, then the university or tech transfer organization really has to ask themselves, do we want to continue? Do we believe in this enough to believe that before the patent expires, there will be someone who will want to license it and who will want to work with this particular innovation? That's a question for the tech transfer organization. When no one is commercializing at least similar technology, it becomes really hard to find a partner. And the reason why is because no one's working with this technology to make products, to do something in a business sense. If no one's working with it in a business sense, even if it's like doing business-oriented research, it's really hard to make that connection between the patent holder, the tech transfer organization, and the company, because then you're selling them not only on the innovation, but on the idea of coming into this particular area. And that is super hard.
In your opinion, what are some of the key legal and ethical concerns, because I can imagine there are some, that universities may have and need to address when applying AI-driven tools to tech transfer in particular, but also partnering more generally when it comes to, especially to IP ownership, because this is something that we have already discussed. So just curious whether you have any advice when it comes to, taking some very concrete steps towards that direction.
There is always going to be a certain element of risk when using an AI tool, because you are putting your invention description out there into a software platform. You want it to be handled confidentially and privately and with respect, but you don't actually know that. Even if the company has a good policy, it's still taking a risk. So one thing that I always discuss with my clients is, what kind of risks are you willing to take? Now, for example, many of my clients, universities, but also small businesses, have said, once we have filed the patent application, that's fine, because we know we have the date and we know we're protected. Okay. Others have said, once something is published, the paper is published or the patent application is published, that's great. Others are also willing to work with these tools even at an earlier stage, because they say, we're a small office, for example. We don't have a lot of resources. If we don't take some more risks with our IP, then we may not be able to find partnership opportunities for the patents, and it will never change the world or make the world a better place. And that is not something that we want. Our mission is to get our inventions out there. So it depends on risk, how much risk you want to take. And of course, once you filed, once it's published, I think people can feel a lot more comfortable. But in some cases, universities are even saying they want to keep some things as a trade secret. For example, a chemical process, maybe a process for making one of these nano whatevers, or some other kind of chemistry process. They may not want to publish that, and they may not want to put that into a patent application. Then that could be much riskier to put into one of these generative AI tools. Because the truth is, you never really know. But that is also why I think it's important to discuss it as an organization. Discuss it as a tech transfer office. Discuss it with your university or other members of your organization. Make certain that everyone knows what can go into a particular generative AI tool and what can't, and also how to distinguish between different generative AI tools. One of the things that worried me the most, I was having a great discussion with the university, and they say, we don't put any confidential information into ChatGPT. So I said, that's great. What is confidential information according to you? Well, we know it and we see it. And I said, oh dear. I mean, this is going to end in tears, I'm quite certain. So having policies, having definitions, and making certain everyone agrees on what those policies and definitions are is the best way to go forward.
What we often see is that AI is often being treated as this unknown something. And some people really embrace it. Some organizations really embrace it and make use of it and treat it ethically and use it for ethical reasons, of course. But then some are quite scared of it. So I'm wondering, now that you work so much with the universities, do you see any trends, maybe even in terms of how universities behave culturally, or maybe types of universities? So just generally curious to understand, in the context of higher education, which universities are more risk averse and which are ready to take that risk and actually make use of such novel tools.
Actually, it's interesting that you say that, because I would have assumed that, for example, smaller organizations, smaller universities would have fewer problems, and that kind of is the case. But I've run into some smaller universities where there's a blanket rule, no AI, no generative AI anyway, in the office. I'm like, okay. But then sometimes at some of these organizations, the employees will still use it, but they just won't tell anyone. So Asana did this really great research projects, and they found that up to 80% of employees use generative AI tools without telling their boss, which in my opinion is a recipe for a disaster. So I think that it is more how risk averse the particular university is, how much they've discussed it with their legal counsel, right? Because there is liability that's potentially there. I also believe, and I think I understand why, that universities, like more like hospitals and universities like a strong medical school, those organizations are more careful. And I do understand why, because a lot of the data that they have access to is super sensitive. So then they do need to put up more guardrails. But otherwise, I would say more depends on risk. There are some organizations that say no generative AI, some that say use it however you like. I haven't seen as many yet with really defined policies, but those are starting to come online. And I think that's really where the sweet spot is. Having a policy, defining the policy, and then also letting folks know which generative AI tools are okay and which are not.
Maybe I can steer our conversations towards even more forward-looking sort of topics, and looking ahead, how would you envision the role of AI or any other new technologies and tools evolving in this broader innovation ecosystem, so to say?
I would say that generative AI will do two things for universities and other organizations, but particularly for tech transfer organizations. It will reduce friction. So what do I mean by that? It will help universities build relationships with companies with specific contacts in those companies to bring them the right innovation at the right time, packaged in the right way, so that their contact in the company can really understand that innovation and can quickly decide yay or nay on it. So it's going to speed up timing and efficiency by reducing friction. But AI is also going to increase expectations. All technologies do this. If you think about it, once we had the light bulb, we expected our homes to be brightly lit all the time. Once we had spell checker, we expected our documents to not have spelling mistakes, or at least the people would check before they're being sent out. So generative AI in particular is going to raise expectations. Universities and other tech transfer organizations that don't use generative AI, I fear, will get left behind because they won't be able to fulfill the expectations of their commercialization partners. The same is true of small and large companies who want to bring innovation into the company. They're not going to be able to fulfill the expectations of the universities using AI if they themselves are also not using AI to bridge those gaps. So reducing friction, great, but increasing expectations, we have to watch out for that. If we don't use AI, we could get left behind.
Very nicely said. So maybe with that, we can finish off with your advice to those universities and research institutions, research organizations that are perhaps hesitant right now to adopt any of the AI-driven tools like RocketSmart, for example, or any other ones for their tech transfer efforts. What would you tell them?
So I would recommend, of course, reading more about AI, talking to other members of the organizations like UIAN in order to learn from each other. Look, we shouldn't all be reinventing the wheel. We should talk with each other and share our knowledge. Beyond that, I think it's good to pick a small pilot project. If you look at your overall tech transfer process, what is the one thing that has a lot of friction, that slows you down, that makes you and your fellow colleagues crazy? Pick that one aspect and then figure out how generative AI can help. Now, I'm hoping someone will put my email address in the chat. I'm always happy to have a quick call with folks and point you to resources. There are a lot of great resources out there to help you, but the single best thing to do is to understand the problem you're trying to solve and make that problem as small and as specific as possible for your first pilot project so that you are able to ask how AI can help you instead of only fearing AI as a giant kind of blob. As you mentioned, the black box, let's transform that back into a tool that helps us.
Wonderfully said, Dora, and thank you so much for this conversation. I would certainly invite everyone to get in touch because I'm sure there are many more questions that could be explored in that area. And yeah, please stay tuned because there will be more of those events and conversations like this one. Thank you so much for joining me. Again, I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation at a different stage as well. And thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to today's discussion. Follow UIN on LinkedIn, and if you're enjoying our podcast, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review in your podcast platform of choice to help other people find this content too.